my friend and colleague Bradley Horowitz, who will then kind of move forward with the interview with Padmasree. So Bradley, I'll highlight you.
Thank you so much.
On board.
Thank you. And it's great to see everybody. I think this is one of the most joyous things, is seeing the grid of faces and hearing the call outs of Argentina and San Jose, and some of you are in my backyard and some across the world. It's really, really great to convene like this and spend this time together. It's very powerful, and I really appreciate you finding the time to come together with us. I'm also really excited to have Padmasree here today, because over the last 6 months or so, Padmasree and I have gotten to be friends and started a bit of a working relationship together. And I remember being intimidated the first time we sat down together. When you hear her resume, it's really unlike anyone's. It's spectacular, just the amount of achievements. But that has worn off over the last 6 months. As I've gotten to know her, and she's sort of been incredibly real and straightforward and vulnerable. It's just been great to get to know her as a person, not just as the legend in Silicon Valley that she is. But rereading her accomplishments, I am again intimidated. And it's been sort of stunning to go through. I'm going to rattle off just a few. We don't have time in the hour to go through the entirety of all she's done and influenced in the industry. But first and foremost, she's been a C-level executive at some of the hottest and most successful companies in technology, including Motorola and Cisco, where she served as CTO, Chief Technology Officer. She serves on boards of some of the most influential and impressive companies in the world, including Microsoft and Spotify, and has formerly served on the board of Corning, Box, and Cornell University, to name just a subset. In addition to this for-profit work, she also does a tremendous amount for the community, the tech community at large. She's a huge advocate of STEM education. She serves on the board of the Joffrey Ballet, advisory boards of the National Science Foundation, various museums, the list goes on and on. She's won innumerable accolades and awards. And she has over 1.4 million Twitter followers. That's crazy. But all of these accomplishments aside, she is an incredibly brilliant, warm, kind person. And it's those qualities that have really made me enjoy getting to know her and having the opportunity to share a bit of her story with you today. So what we just had is sort of the CV, the list of bullet points of some of what she's accomplished. But I wanted to kick this off by giving Padma a chance to sort of peel that back and, in a more narrative fashion, explain to us how you got to be you. It's great that you've accomplished all these things. What's the story behind that?
Well, thank you so much, Bradley. You've been a true friend and a supporter of my latest endeavor. I think you're being very, very kind in introducing my accomplishments. And Soren, I've known you, feels like a lifetime almost. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have all of you. And we're all very grateful that you're taking time out of your days to join us today. I hope all of you are well and safe wherever you are, and with your loved ones. Yeah, my story, I think, as you said, I'm still kind of discovering who I am. I don't think that discovery ends for any of us. We keep learning more things about who we are, what motivates us, and I think that's different. That's no different for me. I'm from India originally. I was born in southern India, to a very, I would say, middle class family. I grew up in India. Where I was growing up, I think I was always fond of science and technology, but never really envisioned when I was a kid that I would really have a career, and as it turned out, a strong career in science and technology. So grew up in India, went to school at a very hardcore engineering school called IITs, which is the Indian Institute of Technology in New Delhi. Very, very male-dominated field, of course. And starting from, I was 17 when I went to Delhi from a small town where I grew up. there were only 5 women in my class of 250. So it's sort of a very, I think uncomfortable experience where you realize it's sort of like you're surrounded by people who are smart, but also very different from who you are. I think that experience actually taught me the power of having allies and people that will be your supporters, that will root for you, that will support you. There were 5 women in my class back then. We literally were a network, and we were always a unit together. We supported each other, we rooted for each other, we helped each other. I think that has actually stayed with me my whole life. I'm now a big believer that you have to belong as an individual to many, many micro communities. And those communities each help you grow in very different ways, right? So that's sort of my learning from when I started college. And after I finished my undergrad, I came to the US to go to graduate school. I often tell the story. I came to the United States with $100 and a one-way ticket, and literally not knowing how the future would end up. And it was sort of like I had to make whatever this journey was interesting. And my father, back then, I came to the US, and my father told me, I called him and said, like, I don't know if I like this. I want to come back home. After the first week at Cornell, I came to Cornell University to go to grad school. And he told me, you've chosen your path, and now it's up to you to make the journey interesting. You can't come back. That's another message I think that stayed with me. I think we all choose paths in our lives, and we have to figure out how to make that journey interesting. And I think we do. I think if we are courageous enough to go through that journey, we do. So yeah, I finished my graduate school from Cornell and started working, and the rest, as they say, is history. I've stayed here. I've worked at different great companies, shifted industries. I worked at Motorola. Then I went to Cisco, where I led a team of 26,000 for a worldwide team of 26,000 engineers worldwide at Cisco. Then after that, I built electric cars for China. And then now I'm doing a startup. So I've sort of like got the big company experience and the startup experience, got to meet great people along the way. So that's sort of, a little bit about who I am from a work perspective. I think I always tell people we often define ourselves by our jobs and our titles, but not really who we are as people. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what I really am outside of my work bio. I love to paint. I'm an artist. I'm teaching myself how to be a better artist. I practice on the weekends, and I experiment with different techniques. I love to cook. I love food. And that's something that I feel is a very therapeutic activity for me. I meditate every day. And I am now trying to be better at yoga, which is sort of like this physical and mental, I think, challenge for me. So yeah, that's who I am. I'm a mom. I have a son who's 27. And my husband's also an engineer, and we live in Silicon Valley.
Beautiful.
Okay, that was beautiful, Padma, but we're going to tease some of that apart. And it was too fast. You glossed over 20 years of a spectacular career. And so one thing I'm curious about, when you made the transition from academia, being a grad student, into the corporate world, and eventually ascending to run teams of tens of thousands of people, whether it's 80,000 or 26,000 or details. How does that happen? Would you say that you always had leadership qualities, or was this thrust upon you, or did you stumble into it? Did you aspire to it? How does one end up leading an organization of that scale? And what was that experience like for you as a woman in tech? And I think we've made a little bit of progress in the intervening time, but it must have been incredibly hard to be leading a team like that at that moment. So tell us a little bit about from here to there. How did you do that?
Yeah, I think I was always very much quote unquote a people person. I enjoy being with people. I get my energy talking to people, learning from people, helping people, supporting them, throwing ideas out, and disagreeing with people, arguing. I don't know if I ever, like when I was very young and when I was studying engineering, thought necessarily of myself as quote unquote a leader of people. I think I was definitely someone who was always with people, and I think got my energy from being with people. Having said that, I'm an engineer at heart, and so I think in my way of approaching things is I'm a problem solver. If I look at things, I tend to want to fix things, want to solve things. So I think I learned maybe the hard way when I first became from an engineer to being a leader of a team, a leader of engineers. I would actually go tell people exactly what they should be doing, and that's not what great leaders do. So I would say my first exposure as a leader, I was probably a terrible leader because I was always like fixing problems for people. I quickly realized that you run out of bandwidth doing that, right? Like you can do that when you have 3 people working for you. You can just like go tell them, do this, do this, do that. But when you have 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, 26,000 people, there's just no way you can do that. So I think in my early experiences as a leader, I realized there's a very big distinction being a great individual engineer or whatever your profession is to leading people. If you're a leader, you have to inspire others to do great work, right? So that's the first and foremost expectation of you as a leader. And so how do you do that? I think you have to have a compelling vision of where is it that we can all go, and also provide for people their own individual motivation on why they should follow you or why they should listen to your vision, right? Now I have a startup. We have 10 people. So I've gone from having 26,000 people to 10 people in the company. Why would anybody leave an Apple or a Google to come work at an unknown startup, right? So that means you have to have a vision that is compelling. You have to have the charisma and the energy where they're willing to like take that risk with you. So I think those sorts of things you learn from, or I learned from experience. And I think the other thing you have to realize is with the role in a big company, in a corporation, you get a lot of power, you get a lot of authority. That doesn't mean you automatically get a followership. People listen to you out of fear, perhaps, or maybe they think, oh my gosh, you're a CTO. If I don't agree with you, that's not a good thing for my career. But that doesn't mean they're following you. So there's a big difference. I think you have to work on getting the followership, on quote unquote being that inspiration for them, right? So that's something that you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And then you talked about breaking the barriers down, and there are very, very few women in the C-suite of any Fortune 100, 500 company. It's sad, and it's changing so slowly. It's not changing fast enough, and there are fewer women in technical roles leading technical teams. So, which is sort of like this other sad thing for me. I wish there would be more great women CTOs and heads of engineering in some of these very large companies. I think that is something I tell people: use your difference, the fact that you're different, to your advantage, rather than seeing it as a disadvantage. Like, people would always remember me because of my strange last name, Warrior. Like, they would say, oh, there was this woman with a strange last name. Or they would remember me because I had a different color skin, or different color skin than what they were used to anyway. I think so. It's like those sorts of things that stand out. I would actually say could be a strength if we use it the right way. That's something I learned also, I think, as I was in board meetings or in large company meetings. I would realize, oh, I could actually use this as my platform to lend my voice for things that I think are important. So I think that's crucially important.
So another thing I'm deeply curious about, you mentioned meditation, yoga, cooking, painting. It seems like somebody asked in the chat, does she have time to sleep? Now, is this something, I've always thought of work-life balance as sort of over a time window. There's times when we're going to work really hard and do all-nighters, and then there's times when we're going to invest in self-care and go on retreats. but at any given instant, it might not be that every day represents, equal portions of care and work. What has that journey been like for you? When you were in the throes of, 26,000 reports over at Cisco, were you still able to do those things, or is it something you're more able to integrate in your current circumstances? Tell us about that journey of sort of finding time for yourself in the midst of all this leadership.
Yeah, I think it is, as you said, it's actually making the time, right? Like none of us have time. And if we think we don't have time, we don't have time. And I think we have to make time for those things that we feel are important and prioritize that. So I often say I don't like the word balance when it comes to work and life. I had a boss one time who asked me that question: how do you balance your work life and your family life? And I replied to him and said, I have one life. And in that life, I have my work and my family. It's sort of like, I don't have two different lives. And I think if you approach it with that attitude, I always talk about it's not so much balance, it's integration. When you say balance, immediately you think these things are all opposing and somehow pulling you in opposite directions. If you think of integration, they come together. Maybe a subtle nuance, but I think it actually changes your mindset quite a bit, right? So I started meditating when my son was born, and I lost my mom the same year. Actually, literally, like within months after my son was born. And I was very close to my mom, and she lived in India back then. And I was running a big semiconductor factory. I had 7 by 24-hour responsibility. I had an infant, and I lost my mom, and I really didn't know how to deal with my grief. And it was sort of something that was forced on me, and I had to stop and think about how do I make meditation part of my daily routine. And you consciously have to give yourself permission to make that time. And I started to do that. And this was back 27, my son is now 27, 27 years ago, I started meditating. When I started, I couldn't sit still for more than a minute. I was this hyperactive person that was always running, and I was like really, really hard for me to like just sit down and focus. So I started meditating like for a minute a day. And that itself was enough to help me just breathe and be calm when before I went to bed. And now I do it for 20 minutes every day. So the point I'm trying to make is no one has time. Everyone is busy. It's not just C-suite executives. Everyone is busy. Even if you're working at a grocery store, you're busy. Probably more busy than if you're a C-level executive. So the point is that how do you make the time? Give yourself a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be like, I'm not meditating 8 hours a day. I'm meditating 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. Coincidentally, the same way I discovered meditation, I discovered the necessity for myself to paint. That was actually when I was at Cisco. Your question, I was running Cisco's enterprise business. We were going through the massive financial crisis at the time. My timing couldn't have been better. It was sort of like I inherited a great business, and things were felt like the world was falling apart. And I found myself working all the time. And, literally I was working during the week, I was working on the weekends. And this was something that I realized was a terrible thing, not only for myself, but for the team I was leading. I had 26,000 people on my team. I would shoot them messages saying, what's this product doing? What's this customer saying? And I found that through my actions, I was making 3-4 levels down in the organization all work to get me the answer when they didn't need to perhaps give me the answer right then. I had to hit the pause button to ask myself, is this the right thing to do? And I started then practicing what I call digital detox. And so I came to this agreement with myself that I would not work Saturday and part of Sunday. That was sort of my time to do other things. I actually went on an all hands meeting and made that announcement to my whole team. It sounds odd, like to say to your team, okay, I'm not going to work Saturday and Sunday, right? But unless you say it explicitly, the organization's expectations are maybe I'm supposed to work the whole time. But I could tell you when I said that, it was literally as if I could hear the entire 26,000 people heave a sigh of relief. because it was sort of like, oh, it's okay to not work on the weekends. And so that was when I started painting on Saturdays, because that was sort of my way of saying I have to force myself not to look at my cell phone and my emails and be on them. So I had to do something else. And so painting was my outlet for doing that. And that's something I keep up now. I paint, I'm actually sitting right across my painting now, and I do that, tomorrow I want to paint. And so I will do that. So it's sort of like, you have to make time for those things that are important for you. And it's, I think, as you were saying, it's not like every day you do all these things. It's sort of like making sure it's those micro goals that you set and micro moments that you have.
Yeah, I want to ask you one further question. Actually, your story reminds me of the joke of the boss who said, if you don't come in on Saturday, don't even show up on Sunday. I very much like your framing of integration rather than balance, where things are in opposition. It's a really beautiful and different way to think about this. How much do you bring mindfulness, meditation into the workplace? Like at the Microsoft board meetings, do you light some incense, repeat some mantras, sing Kumbaya before every time? Or are there little, people talk about microaggressions. I think of little micro compassions, just a look across a room at someone to channel support, or calling on someone who's been quiet in the meeting when you sort of sense that they have something to express. These are acts of compassion, and it requires you to be sort of tuned into a different level than the normal business operations level. Like, do you find yourself bringing this awareness into the business setting, or do you think sometimes it's best to keep those separate?
No, I absolutely do. I think it becomes such an inherent part of who you are. You can't separate the two. I don't approach how I work with, who I work with, who I interact with, whether it's in boards or my own company, whether it's a small team or a large team, any differently. It's a simple, I think it's compassion, it's empathy. It's simply like, by the way, it's not even just physical. Sometimes, we use collaborative tools to work on, right? If someone's texting something or saying something, from the way they are saying something is bothering them, because you're used to just my team members, and I know, right? Like I have a team of 8 people. If someone posts something, I'm like, maybe that person's worried about something. I always go send them a direct message asking them, hey, checking in, is everything okay? 99% of the time they will reply saying, thank you for checking in. Actually, I had a bad night last night, or yesterday something terrible happened and that's worrying me. Maybe something small, but clearly that was something. And then we'll just exchange messages. And at the end, they'll say, thank you, by the way, for checking in. Of course, when we were all working together, that would have been, let's go for a walk and talk about this, right? So it's whatever you do, it's that checking in with each other. Like you're saying, you get those signals from body language. You actually get them even from text messages or what someone's saying in their daily report or daily stand-up meeting we are doing, how someone's reacting to something. I always give permission to people in my company. I had an experience recently where somebody said to me, I need to stop working. It was like Friday around this time, because they said, I'm just overloaded right now. I need to take a break. And this person also meditates, and they're like, oh, maybe I will go meditate and then I'll come back to this tomorrow. Is that okay? And we were like, we're sprinting hard to get our product out. And I was like, yeah, totally fine. Take the time, because I know they'll be much more productive if they take that break versus not taking that break. So yeah, it's something you become. I think that's sort of like that becomes you, right? This is me now, and this is how I lead. So if you want me on your board, you have to be willing to take all of me, not just the work part of me.
We do want you on our board, all of us. So let's bring it to the present moment. When Soren and I named this series, we thought we knew what chaos was, but even in the intervening weeks, the world has gotten even more chaotic and more uncertain, which brings with it all kinds of things, anxiety and optimism and the potential for change. Feels like this is an unprecedented moment in the world, which can create stress, and it's especially hard to lead in a moment where you yourself can't see more than 2 feet ahead. There's so many unknowns right now at every level of health and politics and economy. And just bringing it to this moment, how have you dealt with this moment? And what has it meant for your relationship to the world and your startup endeavor? What can you share about the state of the world and how it's impacted you?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, I mean, we're all human. I think we're all dealing with how quickly things are happening and how quickly things are going from certain to uncertain to chaos, right? And I think we're reeling from it. I think what I am doing personally and as a leader, I'm trying to focus on the things that I can control, meaning what are the things that I can do to help myself, my loved ones, my team, trying to stay focused on that. At the same time, thinking about everything that's happening around me and like I said, I think earlier, what can I do as a leader and as someone who can have influence to lend my voice to the things that I feel are right and support that. So I went on a protest for Black Lives Matter. We took all precautions. It was very peaceful. It was actually contrary to what we see in the press. It was just community getting together and sort of joining hands in speaking up against something that we thought was not right. And so it's sort of like putting yourself out there, right? And making sure in some sense you are using your platform, your privilege, your voice to do the right thing. Trying to keep up with everything that is happening and not necessarily just to react to everything that's happening instantly, but allow the time to process, I would say, listen with empathy and try to understand. There are a lot of things I don't know. I think I don't really feel I know, right? So I'm talking to people who have a different perspective. I'm reading a lot, which is sort of that my company's focus, to help my own knowledge and my own appreciation for the reality of where we are going. So those are some things that I've been doing, and I think they've helped me. I mean, of course, there are days where I go, "Gosh, I can't deal with this anymore." I turn off the TV. I can't watch news anymore. I feel like my Twitter feed is chaotic, and so I try to need to step away. But at the same time, you can't hide. I mean, this is the world. We have to get involved, and we have to change it. And so you can't just stay away either for too long.
You mentioned your startup, and I think people are curious. I've actually seen people asking about it. And at this point in your career, this is not something you certainly had to do to prove anything or for any other reason. So I imagine there's a mission behind this and a motivation that goes beyond just another bullet point in the CV. So let's take some time to unpack that. Can you share what your startup is doing and where you're at in that journey?
Yeah, I started this current company with the motivation of trying to do my part to help address mental health and mental wellness. I think my previous company, I was building electric cars, and so completely different. But as I was developing AI technology for cars to drive themselves, I just felt like there is so much technical capability that is not applied to problems that seemingly seem very big, complex problems in search of a solution, right? And so wellness and mental wellness, especially, I feel doesn't get a lot of attention, doesn't get a lot of focus, especially from the tech industry. If we're talking about burnout and think, working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Up until now, a lot of people see that as a badge of honor in tech. You have to work long hours, you have to burn out. That's a badge of honor, right? Like it's not in reality. If you look at the data, it's quite alarming. Stress, anxiety, depression, workplace suicides, these are all trending the wrong way. More and more people are burning out, stressing out, anxiety, depression, young people, old people, sort of like affecting all of us. That actually really alarmed me, and I would say made me really think about what are some simple solutions to help address this? So we're not necessarily a mental health company. We're more a company focusing on mental wellness. So what are some things we can do to help you relax more, de-stress more? And as it turns out, reading is proven by a lot of medical and scientific research, to be a way to help your mind relax. So when you read a story, you're keeping track of characters, you're keeping track of the plot. So your mind naturally relieves its stress from whatever is stressing us out, right? So we are a company that encourages people to read more and makes reading easy. So we work with experts in the industry to help select great books, and we will feature those books, and you can choose, because so many millions of books out there, we're all very confused. We're already short of time, and you're like, I don't know what book to read, even if I said I want to read, right? Like we all want to read, we all want to take care of ourselves, but it's like finding something useful where it's not a waste of my time, but actually helps me. So how do we find those great books? So we would surface that by going to other experts and interesting people to make those recommendations. And then you can read by yourself, or you can read with your friends and family. You form a reading club, you invite your friends to join you, and you read together, you discuss together, you debate things together. It's very private, very safe community to do that. So in some ways, reinventing the whole social media and social networks away from the noise and the fake news and the abuse to doing something useful. So that's what we are trying to do. And hopefully we will be successful in getting people to read, even if it's 10 minutes a day, read something interesting for 10 minutes a day.
Fantastic. I saw Jack from Twitter actually tweeted something the other day that said, please read the link before you actually share the link. People are moving so fast now, they're not even bothering to open the package before they hand it off to their followers and things like that. So I think this concept of slowing down and actually taking time for both my own mental wellness, but also to bring knowledge and wisdom into the world, this could be a really important development if you can make it work. And I'm certainly grateful you're investing your energy in something that can really make a difference like this. And it is a moonshot. It's a bold, this isn't junk food. It's not sugar and caffeine. This is vegetables. And, they're better for you, but it's a little bit harder to remind people of that. So I did see one question, which and by the way, I want to mention, we are going to turn this over to questions from the community soon. So you can ask those either in the chat session. Soren, is that the best way for people to get their questions? Is that?
We can do a little bit of both. There's a few people I'll bring in. So if you want to do a few from the chat, and then maybe we'll do one or two via video. Okay. So we can do a combination.
Great. I'll start with one from the chat that I thought was interesting. Given the nature of the mission of Fable, why did you choose to structure it as a for-profit company versus a nonprofit company? You have affiliations with both, and I'm curious to hear that answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would say it's sort of like a we're very much a mission-driven company, right? And so our business model is actually, a big part of our business model is to sell to companies to have them buy memberships for their employees. So we kind of thought about, where do naturally people get together and collect together and work together already and collaborating and read together. But instead of maybe your boss asking you why you're not working Sunday, maybe you could read with them, so that's the idea. So we kind of do that. We have a pretty discounted tier once we launch for people that are students, and we could give it free for veterans, for example, or frontline workers right now in healthcare. So we would offer them free membership. So it's sort of like, in that way, we are, I think, trying to figure out how do we make a great business out of it, but then at the same time enable those that perhaps don't have the access to have access to it by waiving the membership fee or giving them some credits for books, those sorts of things. That's sort of like a great question. I think the thing with the not-for-profit is, I personally don't have expertise building a not-for-profit kind of a company. I'm a business person first and foremost. And so I think that's my natural inclination would be, how do I create something that is a very mission-driven business, right? Because so far, social media's business model was advertising, which drives very different kind of behaviors versus like, if you belong to a community and if that community is such a rich experience, you actually don't need to advertise as a form of revenue.
Yeah, and I hope that once the ecosystem begins to thrive, that there's also economic opportunity for the creators. I think that's one of the big challenges of our time is how do the creators get their fair share of the work that they're producing? And that would be wonderful because it will create that flywheel of more and more great content and people being able to thrive. Soren, do you want to take a live question? Can you help moderate?
I know that, actually our friend Scott Shute has a question. And so Scott, Padma, is the head of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn and is trying to integrate this in there. And let's see, Scott, I'm asking, you're unmuted. Yeah, welcome.
Excellent. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for your time, Padma. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for being part of the faculty for the Inner MBA that's coming up later with Wisdom and LinkedIn and Sounds True. And one of my questions for you is, what are some of the leadership qualities that you think are different now and in the next 20 years versus the 20 or more years that you've been working? Like, what's changing and what's critical now?
I mean, that's such a great question. I was just speaking to somebody about that. I think the 10 years, even as early as I would say 5 years ago, but definitely 10 years ago, 15 years ago, leaders were expected to sort of like give all the answers, right? If you're a leader, you kind of knew all the answers. You said you were more like a general, like this is the battle we were going to go. Here's the battle plan. We are going and doing that. These days, I think the expectations are a lot different. I think people want to be part of the community that makes a decision. Like they want to be part of the decision making. I mean, including like who you sell to, what you sell, who should your customers be, what do you stand for? So I think definitely the decision making is much more collaborative these days. And again, depends on the scale of the team and scale of the company, but the more people you can include in sort of that process of making whatever decisions we are making as a leader, I think that is definitely changed from even 5 years ago, for sure, 10 years ago. The other thing I would say that's different is people want to know what you stand for personally. It's sort of like your personal values in addition to your company values. And that's not something you could delegate. You could not like just have your head of HR write a memo and say, this is sort of the values for the company. That's great. But Padma, what do you think about XYZ issue? So I think that is very different. I think it puts a lot of pressure on CEOs. But at the same time, it's sort of like you have to really be thoughtful about what you are saying. You have to be inclusive, right? And you have to sort of, at the same time, be genuine about your position. You can't just sit on the fence a lot of times. So very different way of leading. The third thing I would say, if I were to say the three biggest things that are extremely different, is you have to be first and foremost a listener, and sort of listening with empathy is probably the biggest skill for successful CEOs going forward. Like, how do you listen? It doesn't mean you don't make decisions. At the end of the day, if you are in any kind of a C position, your job is to make decisions, and you have to disagree with your team sometimes and say, I think it should be this way. But it's sort of like doing that after you've listened to them. I think that is a lot more important these days, maybe even more important going forward. I think, it's those things, and being a constant learner. A lot of us, I think, a lot of CEOs have trouble in saying, I don't know this topic, I don't know this issue. I think more and more, whether it's the Me Too movement or the Black Lives movement, I think it's all caught several people surprised, like, oh, I didn't know that was an issue, right? It's sort of like, so I think you have to be a learner. You have to constantly say, I want to go learn about that topic and discover that. And there's just so many things like that. And so that's one of the things we hope to make it easy for people with Fable. It's sort of like that micro learning within groups.
Thank you. It's great.
Hey, Bradley, do you want to take one from the chat and then I can do one more from video? I know that looks like Rashmi had a question here.
Yes. Rashmi's question is, do you believe there is a change in the mindset required across boards to be more inclusive and conscious of potential hiring biases? So let me repeat that. I didn't read that well. Do you believe there is a change in mindset required across boards to be more inclusive and conscious of potential hiring biases?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that, at least on the boards that I'm on, we constantly talk about. It is sort of like not just conscious, but I think the person is saying is it unconscious bias, right? You know, sometimes there's more unconscious bias as well. It's really understanding both and figuring out how do you surface that, how do you encourage people to be much more inclusive in who they're considering, who they're talking to on the job, you know, who are they shortlisting, how do they recruit, and then not only just recruit, but then how do you retain them? I think there's a lot more work we have to do to be inclusive more broadly. I think so far we've focused our conversations primarily, I would say, on gender issues. I think now we are realizing there's just so many levels of unconscious bias that we are faced with, and we all have to like look at ourselves in the mirror, whether you're on a board as a board member, or you're on the management team of a company, and say, where could we have perhaps exposure that we should make sure we are thinking about, right, and acting upon. So yeah, definitely that's a whole mindset shift.
Let's see, here's one, Gustavo. Welcome, sir. Where are you calling from? And let's see, what is your question for Padmasree?
Yeah, I'm calling from Uruguay. And well, first of all, thank you, Soren and Bradley, for bringing the lady warrior into our homes and offices. And the question is concerning your experience with teams. Now we have this situation in which there are many teams that are working virtually, right? Which is completely different from when you were managing thousands of people and you had them practically on hand. What advice would you give to companies that are now entering in creating virtual teams, and how do you suggest they do the work in order to get the results? Because it's completely different environment, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think we're all learning how we do that. In some ways, all these technologies existed, right? Like video conferencing has been around for a long, long time, but we never thought it would become such a big part of our lives until recently. It's not just for work now. I think Soren was talking about mindfulness sessions on video that they're conducting. I do a yoga class on Zoom. It's sort of like all these things in our lives have become driven by using, you know, virtual way of connecting. How much of that will stay permanently? And then when it comes to the context of work, how do we make virtually connecting with people in distributed ways as effective as being there face to face? And so, yeah, I don't know all the answers. I think they will unveil as we go. We are a very small company now. There's about 9 of us in our company, and we started off as a distributed company. We have one person in London, one person in Chicago, one person in LA, rest of us here in Bay Area. The thing that is different about virtual, when you're working virtually, is to make sure you are disciplined enough to check in with each other on a almost regular basis, right? And so it's sort of like something you have to consciously put effort on, because you don't have that luxury, as you were saying, of walking up to someone's desk and say, hey, do you have a minute? And then asking them that question, because you don't know what the person's doing. You don't want to necessarily interrupt their dinner and say, hey, do you have a minute? So I think it is something we have to structure. The way we do it in our companies, like we structure times, we all talk, whether it is on a collaborative software platform, or whether it's on a video call, or whether it's on email. And we also put do not disturb signs on our profiles when we want to be focused, and we turn notifications off. So it's sort of like, that's when, if you're in an office environment, closing your door or wearing your headphones, those are all symbols of telling people I'm focused now, don't disturb me. the tendency when you're working virtually is to disturb people more by interruptions. And so these are some things we're learning as we do this. I think some of these things will hopefully become features in product that will make it much clearer. I think the one thing I think we are using on Zoom now is raising your hand, right? This is what I found originally when we were working virtually, is there's a tendency to interrupt each other because you don't have that body language signal of someone's about to say something. So everyone's talking over everyone else. And so now we are sort of like more disciplined about mute everyone and unmute if we have a question. So I think those are some things you have to learn we have to all learn to get better. In some cases, I actually feel productivity goes up if you're working remotely, whereas if you're in the office, you don't have the time wasted on commute. You don't have the time wasted dealing with traffic issues and things like that. On the other hand, if you have small children and they're home, it's very difficult for people to homeschool their kids and work at the same time. People really, really are struggling with that. So I think those are some pros and cons, I feel.
Thank you.
It's fascinating, Padma. You mentioned integrating your whole self. One byproduct of this virtual thing is we actually get to see into people's homes. We see dogs, we see babies, we see husbands, we see wives, and it's a humanizing thing. And I also like that in this virtual grid here, everybody's pretty much the same height. You don't have any advantage from being 6'4" and tallest being in the room. So who knows all the implications? And I think, like you said, we're still figuring out all of this, but there was a question that maybe this will humanize us all because the veneer of our professional personas is sort of stripped away and we're all just doing our best in our quarantine.
Yeah, I think there's no right answer, right? I think for some people, working from home is better. For some people, it's not. I think for some people, again, I know definitely my son is grown up now, but if he were young, it would be really hard to have young kids who I'm homeschooling and trying to work and trying to figure out my dinner plans or lunch plans, etc. So I don't think there's a simple one size fits all. And I think this is also, I think the pandemic also had, unfortunately, so many people lost their jobs in this. And so I think we should especially focus on how do we all what can we do to bring them back into the workforce? What could we do to get employment back to where it was? I think that's got to be a big focus for all of us.
And then there's one maybe last question, if you have a moment, from Rick. All right, Rick. Let's see. And then we just have a few minutes, but I'm asking you to unmute. So go ahead. I can't hear you yet. No, let's see. It looks like you're unmuted on our side. Still can't hear you, sadly. But my system says you're unmuted. Sorry, we still can't hear you. You want to text it, or do you want me to read what you wrote in the? I think we might be able to hear you now. All right. So Rick said, "I'd like to ask Padma, what advice would she give to leaders who feel apprehensive or scared to speak out openly about our current societal or political climate?"
Wow.
What role should our leaders, business leaders, have in speaking out on their political views or societal views, whether that's...
Oh, what role should leaders have, or what should leaders do to encourage others to speak up?
He says, what would you say to leaders who feel apprehensive to speaking out openly about our current societal or political climate? So I think that could be against maybe a political leader or against a social cause. So there's certain leaders he's suggesting that might be apprehensive to say, I'm for Black Lives Matter, or I disagree with what the president is saying or the senator is saying. And so how much as business leaders do they involve in that, or do they stay away from that?
Look, I'm a big believer that first criteria to be a leader is to be authentic as a person, right? So I think if you feel strongly about something, you should state what your position is, as long as that position is not alienating others. I think it's the way you say it versus how, what you say. It's how you say it. And, if you say it in such a way as this is what I believe, it doesn't mean I don't respect other opposing views, or I respect your view to your right to have a completely different view from mine. I think that is very different from saying, this is my view and I'm saying this because I am XYZ in this company. And I think, to me, not stating your opinion is probably worse than because people then will try to guess and try to put assumptions in what you're thinking. Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do. I would say, this is my opinion, but I respect everyone's right to have a completely different opinion from me. And in my company, I would allow that, right? Like it's not, you're welcome to state your opinion and say who you are. It doesn't mean we all have to believe in one thing. So that's kind of how I would approach it. It's a great question, though. Very good question.
I think we're almost at anything else, Bradley, Irene, to kind of finish up anything we might have missed, Padma or Bradley, that feels important to address?
I think at this point, I just want to thank Padma. That was an incredibly packed 50 minutes that you just spent with us, with many, many lessons. We actually have many, many questions. Super grateful you found time to do this with us. I think it will help all of us on the call and all of those who see this via YouTube. And super excited not only about all you've accomplished, but all you are working toward and yet to do. It's really inspirational, and we are grateful for all you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for all the questions and for being with us today. Again, I just want to say that we're all in this together. I think no one knows the answers. I think there's a lot of uncertainty ahead. I think the only way to get through uncertainty is to do it together and do it with compassion and empathy. So I wish all of you great success and good health.
Thank you. And for those who want to keep updated on Fable, what would the best way to do that be? Would it be to follow you on Twitter, or is there a Fable?
Sign up for Fable. Go to. Can I post the link here? I'm happy to post.
Somebody already did, but yeah, you can put it in the chat. Fable.co, is that it?
Yeah, fable.co. So yeah, www.fable.co. Please sign up. There is a sign up there, and I will get all those sign up emails. And yeah, definitely you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would love to stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, many blessings to everyone here. And again, thank you so much, Padmasree. Thank you so much, Bradley. And really appreciate everybody coming together in this way. And so I will unmute. So you can now, I'll let you unmute yourself, and we can say just like 60 seconds of goodbyes.
Thank you, Padmasree. That was great.
Thanks, Padma.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really good.
Really good, really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Soren. Thank you,
Brilliant.
Padmasree.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Soren.
Bradley.
Thank you.
We need a green economy. Green economy.
Need a green economy. Thank you. All right. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
God bless.